You know, the first thing you do when you walk through a doorway is look around, right? And when you're a photographer, you look for light and patterns and depth. I was standing in little Brady's house. His mother had let me in, and his father was on his way home from the hospital where he worked as a physician. I was there to do portraits, and out of the corner of my eye, I see little Brady running down the hallway, waving a big piece of paper. As he got closer to me, he put both hands behind his back. And then as he got right up to me, his mom said, "Brady, why don't you give Garrett the drawing that you made?" And Brady reached up with both hands and handed me his masterpiece. I took it and I said, "Thank you, Brady. This is beautiful." And as I looked at Brady's painting, I had no idea what it was. From one perspective, it looked like it might be a dog or maybe a bear. And then when I turned it slightly, I don't know, it kind of looked like a monster or maybe an alien. And Brady looked up at me with those big brown eyes. And he said, "Do you know what it is?" I knelt down and I got face to face with Brady. I put my hand on his shoulder and I said, "Brady, I don't know what it is, but I know it's awesome. Can you tell me what it is?" And Brady shrugged his shoulders and he said, "It's a bacteria." Wait, what? It's a bacteria? I could have guessed 100 times and I never would have guessed it was a bacteria. I looked up at Brady's mom and she kind of smiled and shrugged her shoulders. Now, I have children of my own, and I know that children love sharing bacteria. In fact, they've probably shared some with me. But this was the first time anybody had ever drawn me a picture of a bacteria. I didn't know what a bacteria looked like. And I think Brady sensed my confusion, and he said, "It's okay, Mr. Garrett. This is a good bacteria." Wait, what? A good bacteria? I didn't know there was good bacteria. I thought all bacteria was bad. I have since learned that there are, in fact, good bacteria. We're all familiar with bad bacteria, right? Bad bacteria promote sickness and disease, but good bacteria promotes immunity and longevity. Brady said, "It's okay, Mr. Garrett. This is a good bacteria." And then he said, "Do you know why?" At this point, I'm just waiting to soak up every bit of wisdom that drops from this 4-year-old boy's mouth. "Tell me, Brady, tell me why this is a good bacteria." And Brady pointed to the center of the page and he said, "Because this one has a smile. Because this one has a smile." Humankind is chasing success. We're all chasing success in one way, shape, or form, but we don't even truly know how to define success. To some people, success is a fancy title and a big corner office. You want to be president and CEO of a large organization. To other people, success looks like a big bank account and a fat retirement fund. To others, success might be a long, happy marriage where you're still in love after all those years. To some people, success looks like being friends with your adult children. To others, success is a nice car or a beach house or maybe even a ton of social media followers. However you define success, we're all chasing it, right? Do you know what the number one contributing factor to success is? It's not environmental factors, it's not socioeconomic factors, it's not even genetic factors. The number one factor that contributes to a person's success is their attitude. Their attitude. And I think we'll all agree that attitudes are a lot like bacteria. There's good attitudes and there's bad attitudes. The good attitudes promote immunity and longevity, and the bad attitudes promote sickness and disease. Not long ago, I was at a major clothing retailer making some purchases, and I had waited in line for quite a while. The woman in front of me, she had a cart full of stuff. She was buying the whole store, it seemed, and there was only one lady working the cash register. Now, there was another young man up behind the cash register, kind of screwing around. I don't know what he was doing, and so I approached, thinking maybe he would do my transaction. Without even looking up, he said, "Not open." I said, "Okay," and I turned back and went to my place in the front of the line. Everybody in line behind me just kind of looked at their phones or looked at the ground and pretended not to notice my plight. A few minutes later, he moved to another cash register, and again, without looking up, he said, "Next." So as I approached, I realized I could respond in one of two ways. I could return his rudeness with rudeness of my own, or I could try to flip the script and see what happened. So I set my items on the counter, and he began to, take the anti-theft device off. I said, "Can I ask you a question?" And again, without looking up, he said, "Sure." Now, I had noticed that he had really cool hair. His hair was in dreads, and it was pulled up on top of his head in a band, and then it floofed out the top. He kind of looked like a human pineapple. And the lady working the cash register next to him, she had really great hair too. And so I said, "Can I ask a question?" And he said, "Sure." I leaned in and I said, "Is it like a requirement that you have to have really cool hair to be able to work here? Because..." And I smiled and I pointed to my head. He slowly looked up and a smile crept over his face. He said, "Bro, you could totally work here." Okay, I went from having this guy who didn't even want to acknowledge me, and now he's saying, "Hey, we could be coworkers." It was great. We finished the transaction, and as I turned to leave, he said, "Hey, man, let me know if you want an application. We're always hiring." I smiled when I walked out of the store because I realized that my attitude had completely changed my experience. And not only did it change the experience for me, it also changed it for him. And I'd be willing to bet that my attitude also changed the experience of everybody in line behind me. Your attitude has more to do with your success in life than anything. Years ago, when I was a high school junior, I was a very involved student. Now, I wasn't great academically, but I wasn't bad either, pretty average. I was taking Algebra 2, and I was involved in everything. Every extracurricular activity I could sign up for, I did. And then I was working in the evenings and on the weekends. And I remember sitting for this Algebra 2 test, and I didn't know anything. I hadn't studied, I hadn't prepared. I was trying to guess my way through the test, and it wasn't going well. I knew it, and I was frustrated, I was angry, I was mad at myself. And I finished the test, and I was about to turn it in, and I decided to write my teacher a note. On the bottom of the last page, I wrote, "Dear Mr. Morford, I'm sorry that I did poorly on your test. It's not your fault. You presented the information. I was just too busy with my other responsibilities to adequately study." Something to that effect. Now, why did I write that note for Mr. Morford? A couple reasons. Number one, I knew that Mr. Morford cared for me. I knew he cared for each one of his students, and I knew that my performance on his test was going to discourage him, and I didn't want that to happen. The second reason is I hope that he would see that note and realize my maturity in accepting responsibility for my actions. And years later now, I realize that I didn't really accept responsibility. I just shifted the blame, right? But the third reason, and probably the most honest reason, if I'm being completely transparent, is I hope that Mr. Morford would grade on the curve if he could, or maybe if given the opportunity, just bump my grade up just slightly and give me a passing grade. I turned in my test. The next day I walked into class and Mr. Morford stood at the front of the classroom with the tests in his hands. Now, when he graded tests, he always folded the tests in half, so when he handed them out, we couldn't see each other's scores. Eventually, he called my name to come to the front and receive my test, and I went back to my seat and I didn't look. I couldn't look. I didn't want to know the score on my test. I sat down in my seat and he finished passing out the tests and he said, okay, we're going to take the next 10 or 15 minutes and go over the tests and I'll answer any questions that you have. I thought, okay, now's as good a time as ever. I might as well get it over with and look. I opened my test to reveal a big red F. Now, obviously, math is not my strong suit, but I am smart enough to know that there's no rounding up a 36%. You can't fix a 36% no matter what the curve is. And as I went through my test page after page, I was so disappointed with myself, so discouraged and angry and frustrated. Like, how could I let myself do so poorly on this test? But as I looked, I noticed that Mr. Morford had taken the time to write out and solve each problem that I missed. When I got to the last page, I noticed that note that I had written at the bottom of the test. And under my note was a new note written in red that said, Dear Garrett, life is a series of choices governed by priorities. Sincerely, Al Morford. Life is a series of choices governed by priorities. You see, Mr. Morford knew that there was more to education than the pages of a textbook or the confines of a curriculum. Mr. Morford saw a student, a young man who was open and willing and ready to take some real life advice that might just stick with him forever. And it has. I wish I could go back and tell Mr. Morford how many times I considered his note. Life is a series of choices governed by priorities. When I graduated high school and went to college, yes, I did graduate high school. When I graduated high school and went to college, when I met Joy, who later became my wife, when we got married and started a family of our own, life is a series of choices governed by priorities. As we sold our home and moved from one state to the next, career changes, various moves, decisions we made with our kids, life is a series of choices governed by priorities. You see, success in life not only has to do with your attitude, but it also has to do with your ability to accept failure and then show up the next day and try to come back stronger. Success also has to do with your ability to define clear priorities and then remain committed to them. Life is a series of choices governed by priorities. Over the last 10 years, I've had the opportunity to work with some of the most inspiring people I've ever met. Nurses, doctors, and support staff, all working on the front line to care for people who are broken, wounded, and injured, to care for the most vulnerable. And one of the folks that I get to work with, his name is Dr. Lee. Dr. Lee is a brilliant surgeon. He's a fellowship-trained urologic oncologist. I've worked with him for 10 years, and I'm not even really sure what that means, but I know it means he's smart. He's also the director of robotic surgery. And over the last decade, he and I have worked together to promote robotic surgery in Northwest Georgia. One day, Dr. Lee and I were talking, and he said, Garrett, can I give you some feedback? He said, can I give you a suggestion on how to do your job better? Ooh, that kind of hurt a little bit. You see, feedback can often be mistaken for criticism. And I don't know that those were the exact words he used, but that's how I heard it. Dr. Lee said, Garrett, he said, you need to round on your doctors, round on your surgeons. And I thought to myself, round on my doctors? Like, that's what doctors do. They round on their patients. I said, that's your job. That's not my job. And he shrugged his shoulders and he said, as a surgeon, how do I know how my patients are doing if I don't round on them? How do I improve as a physician? How do I become the best version of myself if I don't round on my patients? Oh, very good point, Dr. Lee. Over the years, I've interviewed a lot of Dr. Lee's patients. And you know what they say? Every single time, they say, Dr. Lee is a great surgeon, and he's an even better human being. Dr. Lee came by and saw me himself. Dr. Lee called me at night when I was at home. Dr. Lee gave me his personal cell number. Dr. Lee said if I had any questions or experienced any complications, to call the office and immediately head in, and he would see me right away. Dr. Lee, Dr. Lee, Dr. Lee. You see, success in life not just has to do with your attitude or your ability to rebound from failure or your clear priorities. Success in life has to do with, can you take feedback and then turn it into something good? Over the years, I've had the opportunity to tell lots of stories, to help people share their stories. And it started out with the written word through articles in newspapers and magazines. And then eventually I started sharing stories on camera in interview settings. And then sometimes it happens on a stage just like this. I love sharing people's stories, and every time I'm in an interview, once we start hitting our sweet spot and hitting our stride, I love to ask this question. At the end of your life, when it's all said and done, what do you want your legacy to be? The reaction is always the same. A pause. They look up. Sometimes they close their eyes, stroke their chin, and then they pause some more. And it's just quiet. Usually they lean in and they say, I just want to know that I made a difference. I just want to know that what I did mattered. At the end of life, you just want to know that you made a difference and that what you did mattered. So maybe success isn't about big titles and corner offices. Maybe it's not about a big bank account and a fat retirement account. If at the end of life, success is about knowing that what you did mattered and that you made a difference, I can't help but go back to the wisdom of little Brady when he handed me the piece of paper and said, do you know why this is a good bacteria? Because this one has a smile.